understood by the quality of your questions. I'm joking though, but does anybody have any questions? Yeah.
So, in terms of a relationship with heaven and earth, I was curious about your description of it within the confines of a marriage and how you would explain the relationship between a man and a woman within a marriage outside from the sexual part, because that's a little obvious.
Yeah. Um, so the way that St. Paul talks about it, right? He talks about the head and the body. That's the way he talks about the relationship between Christ and the church, but also the relationship of the husband to the wife, but then also to the family, right? So it's not just the wife, but the wife. If you look at the image, this image, right? This is a good image of a family. It's a good way to understand that. And so you have the husband. It's weird. I'm sorry. Symbolism is weird sometimes because Mary in the imagery is both the mother and the bride. And in some ways it sounds scandalous, but it's not a big deal because they're both virgins anyways. But the notion is mostly that she becomes, in some way, she encapsulates all the imagery of the feminine in herself. So she's both the mother and the bride. Here, in this particular context, she's really represented as something like the bride. And so you have the husband and the wife, and then you have the gathering of the family together. That's the way that it's traditionally represented. So there are different ways in which it's so hard to talk about this because it's so politically charged, but there's something about the very process. So even just beyond the sexual relationship, which, it's like when I show this, like that's it. Like that's the relationship between a man and a woman. But in terms of how, let's start just with the gestation of the child, right? And so the woman gives body to the child. That's just how it happens. She gives body, then she gives food from her body, and that becomes an extension. It extends into the home, let's say. So that's the way that it was traditionally understood. And so the woman provides home, right? She provides home in her womb for the child, but then she also provides home for the family. And so that's why there's always been a relationship between the feminine and preparation of food, because she gathers the food for the family. She prepares it to hold the family together. And so it's an extension of what happened to the children when they were born. Right? It's a natural extension of that. And so the husband, in the traditional way, will provide name. That's why we have the names of our fathers. There would be different ways of doing it, but you can kind of see how it works. It's like the mother provides body, home, the man provides name, identity, you could say, and then also authority. But the authority, of course, it's a coupling, right? It's the same way that I showed it. So the mother, of course, has authority over the children, and you have to see it as that coupling. So the man and the woman together, the man represents, let's say, the authority in that relationship, then they both represent the authority for the children. So that's the way that it would manifest itself. Only if you understand it, that a hierarchy is not the same as a tyranny. That's not how it works. And so the way, at least, let's say, the Christian hierarchy manifests itself, and it's kind of one of the mysteries of how Christianity shows itself, is that the head gives itself for the body. So the top of the hierarchy gives itself for the bottom of the hierarchy. That's how it works. And then the body gathers itself into the head, and that's a mutual relationship, right? It's a mutual relationship of love, where the reason for authority in a Christian vision is not just so that the king or the chief or the whatever gets the glory, but that person has to give himself and love the the family, love his wife, love the family, love the body that is his body, you could say. All right? And so that's how it traditionally would function in the relationship. Despite how controversial that is. Yeah, go.
You mentioned initially that everything is heaven and earth, and within the structure of heaven and earth, there are many heavens and earth, right?
Yeah.
And as well as the power of sight. eh, When, whenever we see that, is like the apostles and the people involved are looking at the reason. So there's an inevitability of sight involved when it comes to attention. My question would be, since there are heavens and earth, and within this hierarchy, wouldn't it be as well that losing sight of the Logos opens the door to corruption?
Right, yeah, exactly. No, but that's exactly what I said. Losing sight of the reason that's what corruption is. I mean, that's how corruption sets itself. There's no way around it. And it's not like when we say losing sight of the Logos, it sounds very like lofty, and that's totally a good way to say it. But it's as true for a sports team as it is for anything. As soon as you lose sight of the reason why you're together, then corruption will set itself in. And sometimes it's not even a moral. It doesn't even have to be a moral corruption. It can just be corruption. Think about a knitting group, right? So these, a group of people, they come together, they like knitting. They say, we're going to have knitting projects together. So they come around and they start to knit. And then at some point, someone in the group says, oh, I've got a friend that would like to come to the knitting group, but, that person doesn't knit. And it's like, okay, well, maybe, okay, so let's let them in. And so you let that person in. And so then there's someone who comes to the knitting group who doesn't knit and just kind of sits around and talks. And it's like, it's okay. You can tolerate some flexibility. You kind of have to have some, But then imagine if that person says, oh, I've got 10 friends that would love to come to this knitting group, but they don't knit. It's like, how long before it's not a knitting group anymore? At some point, it won't be a knitting group. It'll be something else. It will have died, corrupted, and turned into something else. And it's not a moral question. Maybe that's okay. Maybe they'll decide that this is no longer a knitting group. It's something else. It has another reason for being together. But the process will happen. If they lose sight of their reason, then at some point, corruption will set itself in and will undo their world. Okay? Now, but what's important is to understand that there is, let's say, a need for some, I'm not going to use the word corruption, there's a need for exception in any system. There has to be a few monsters on the edge. That is absolutely necessary. There has to be some fat in the system. You cannot have a system that is too straight, because the system will shatter. Any system. So think about this knitting group again. You've got these people in the knitting group, they're knitting, and then every time someone wants to talk about their day, someone else says, shh, we're knitting, shut up, like that's not what we're doing. And so it's like every time someone wants to go to the bathroom, it's like, hey, we're knitting, what are you doing? This is what we're here for, right? What's gonna happen? The group will shatter, because you need some flexibility in the margins in order to function. And that's like that's a systematically true. It's true in a system way. That is one of the problems that we have in our system right now, is that we have systems that are too efficient. Especially in business, you see that. This is the problem. They're like, we try to make the system as lean as possible. So we want everybody to be working all the time, as much as possible. We don't have too many employees. We don't have too much buffer in the system. I remember they have just-in-time delivery. So it's like, if you need something, it gets delivered the same day, and then you use it so you don't take up your warehouse space, so you don't need as much, and everything gets lean and lean and lean. But the problem is that the fat, that's where you get potential from. Remember when I told you that the bottom of the world is chaos, but it's also potential? So if you don't have a bunch of employees that sometimes have nothing to do, if there's a crisis, you won't be able to handle it. You actually need to have people in the system that are sometimes not doing anything and that are kind of chaotic, that are kind of not aligned with the goal, so that if something happens that will shake the system, you can go into that margin and you can gather more potential into the purpose. Right? So that's true. Like I said, it's true of anything. It's true of a system. It's true of anything. That's why you have people sitting on the bench in a sports team. It's like, it's boring to have people sitting on the bench that aren't like playing the game. But if you don't have people sitting on the bench, then you're going to run into trouble. You need that fat around the system in order to be able to integrate the outside, let's say. Okay. And so that's how, let's say, that's why it looks the way it looks. That's why on the edge of the world, there are always some kinds of monsters, some kind of chaos, some kind of exception. And it happens structurally. Remember when I told you about the image of the world, you know, the omphalos, the belly button of the world and the monsters on the edge? Well, that structure is the structure of a church, like a medieval church would have looked like that too. But you have the altar in the middle, and then on the outside of the church, what do you have? You've got the gargoyles. You need those gargoyles on the outside of the church, because that's how it works. Like, that's, if you want to encompass a whole image of the world, you're going to need that exceptions, right? And so think about in a year, they have the same structure. So a year, a traditional year is patterned, right? We understand that time is patterned. So we have days, you wake up, you have the day, you go to bed, you sleep. Then you have the week, you work during the week, you have some time off at the end. So the week is structured as the day. Then you have the year, and in that year, you have some vacation time. So the year is structured as the week, is structured as the day. It's like a little fractal system. Well, that's true just in terms of secular work, but it's also true in terms of sacred time. So the year used to be organized religiously around festivals. You have Christmas, you have Easter, you have Pentecost, you have Ascension, you have all these celebrations. In other cultures, you would have the same. Jewish culture has all these feasts as well. And then in those feasts, you will have what you could call inversion feasts. And that is a universal thing. You'll have the Feast of the Monster. You can't avoid it. It will happen in every culture. So you will have a feast in the year, which will be like the gargoyles on the edge of the church. So Mardi Gras, Purim, Halloween, whatever, right? In the medieval West, they had a feast called the Feast of Fools. And then at the Feast of Fools, they would take a child, they would make them into a bishop for the day, dress them up as a bishop. They would turn the world upside down. Right? They would go into exception, cross-dressing. They would take a child, they would whatever. Right. In the medieval West, they had a feast called the Feast of Fools. And then at the Feast of Fools, they would take a child, they would make them into a bishop for the day, dress them up as a bishop. They would turn the world upside down. Right? They would go into exception, cross-dressing, just joking, kind of lewdness. All of that would come during those inversion festivals, like that gargoyle on the edge of a church. There's a tradition at Purim, for example, in the Jewish tradition, where on Purim, this is the rabbinical tradition, that on Purim, every man should drink wine and spin on himself until he falls to the ground. Right? It's like you have to kind of embody that chaos just a little bit, right? It's almost like you need to have a place in the year that has, it's a kind of buffer. It's a kind of place to let in just enough chaos, not too much. Too much will poison you. But if you don't have any, then the system will crack. Right? Just think about you. Like if you just work all the time and you don't rest, what's going to happen? You're just going to crack. Right? If you don't take any time to play or to relax or to do things that are a little silly, then it's going to build up in you. And then at some point, you're going to find yourself, in Las Vegas, whatever. Like you're going to smash it, and you're going to move into excess. So a little drip of chaos is actually how the world works. You kind of need that. But So I didn't expect to talk about that, but it's important to understand that because it will help you understand so many things that are happening today. It'll help you understand so many things that are happening today. Our world is a swing between too much order and too much chaos. That's how the modern world is set up. So instead of having this normal fractal system, what we've got is we've got something like heaven and earth separating. And heaven is becoming very, very strong, and earth is becoming very, very strong at the same time, and they're not connecting. And it's important because sometimes you look at the world and you wonder, how is it possible? How is it that we are now seeing in front of us systems of control that the likes of which we've never seen in the history of the world? Tracking, identification, all these things are becoming global. And at the same time, absolute fragmentation, right? Everybody is their own thing. It's like gender identity has exploded into a million different names, and it's like carnival all the time. So you've got carnival, Mardi Gras, and you've got this crazy totalitarian system rising above it. So it's like an excess of the two sides happening at the same time. And some people, it's funny, the modern world is so much like that. In the United States, 100 years ago, alcohol was illegal. But that's how crazy this is. So it's like you move from alcohol is illegal to furry culture, right? How the hell did you get from there to there, right? It's like, no, it's related to each other. It's like these two extremes that are appearing and are breaking down the normal fractal structure, which is supposed to make the world exist, right? There's an image of that in the Bible. In the book of Revelation, it describes a whore riding a beast. That's what it is, right? In that image, the beast is actually it's an amalgamation of all the civilizations. So in Revelation, the beast is all the different elements of the beast come from the book of Daniel that describes all these empires. So like the Persian Empire, the Greek, Alexander's Empire, and all these different empires, Babylonian, whatever. And then they get gathered into one image in Revelation, which is this beast, basically civilization, right? The structure. And then on the back of that is riding a whore. It's like, what's a whore? A whore is chaos, right? A whore is lack of identity, mixture. That's what a whore is. If a whore has a child, you will not know who the father is. You will not know what his name is, right? Mixture, confusion, excess, licentiousness, all of that. And so the thing is that those two, they need each other. You need an excess of one to get the excess of the other. You need an excess of heaven to have an excess of earth. That's how it works, right? I always joke and say, you can't have a punk rocker in the Amazon jungle. They would die in 2 days, right? For a punk rocker, an anarchist to exist, they have to be in an extremely structured society, right? Because normally the chaos and the excessive order, they kind of call each other, right? That's how it works. So yeah, I don't know how I got there, but I think it's important to talk about. Yeah.
So I came into these lectures knowing just a little bit about you and what you talk about. And so I still have yet to figure this out really. But is it enough to understand these patterns from the Bible and their usefulness in our life without affiliation to any one religion? Is that enough? Or do you think that to go along through life that way, there will always be something missing?
Yeah. No, I definitely think that. I think that, I tried to present this pattern as, let's say, as objectively as possible so that people can see it, people can grasp it, people can at least understand that this is actually how reality works. But the thing is that when I say this is how reality works, I mean, this is how reality works. that is, it's not something that you think about, it's something that you participate in. So the patterns that I'm talking about ultimately should be lived. You know, it's not just enough to sit at a desk and think about it. And so part of that means you have to participate in this structure. You have to kind of, you have to enter into it. What that means is enter into these communions. And of course, you know, getting yourself together, you know, aligning yourself towards what is good. You need that. Participating in family or in smaller groups, all of that you need. But I do believe that ultimately the best way to bring it all together is through worship. And it sounds like when I say it that way, it's like, okay, here's Jesus smuggler. But the first reaction, and it sounds like when I say it that way, it's like, okay, here's Jesus smuggler. But the first reaction we should have to a good is to celebrate it. And this is not something you just do in your mind, something that you have to physically do. You can't just think about it. And so that is true of all the goods, but it's excessively true of the highest good, right? And so if we identify the transcendent, everything kind of moving up towards the highest good, the God of love, then you have to worship the God of love. And that it's not arbitrary, it has a form and it does something. And it means also gathering together, right? Paying attention to this, all singing. Why do we sing? It's not arbitrary, right? Singing is this patterning of reality. And so you come together, you pattern reality together, all looking up and all participating in this together. That is the way that reality holds together. Right? It is actually the way reality holds together. And so I do believe that ultimately the breakdown of the religious, let's say the fact that Christianity in the West has been kind of set aside, I think is the main reason why the shattering is happening. Now, the problem is that in this kind of shattering, people can't see it. So you have to help them. Like, you know, the ladder, if you just show them the top of the ladder, they'll be like, I don't know what are you showing me? Like, what is this? You have to kind of rebuild the ladder is the way to say it. So it's like, that's what I'm trying to do. Help people see like, this is how this works. But I do believe that you have to engage. And that does mean, I think, not abstractly, concretely, being part of a body, right? And then submitting yourself to authorities, and then celebrating the highest good, worshiping, doing all those things that people do in church, but not abstractly, really doing it. That's a tough one. But I think ultimately this is what it leads to. But some people will make their way along that route and will find themselves where they will find themselves. But I think ultimately that's what it points to.
You mentioned worship right now, which you've touched before. Even you said in a talk you had with Michael Knowles, you said that you even like force yourself to go to church or something along those lines because there's this chaos pulling you back, that you should not participate into this, which is, you know, something along the lines of diabolical. What is one advice you would give to any of the young minds that are watching this? Not that we're old here, I'm sorry, but what is that particular advice that would set all the other advices apart? Meaning this is at the top of the hierarchy in your system.
With that's what I would say. I think that the highest part is worship. That's what it is. And so that's why I kind of joke and I tell people go to church. And I think you could reduce it to that. It's like participate. Like you don't just think about it. Get involved. Like actually join a body and celebrate. And I know that it's, like I said, it's hard because I don't want. That's why I talk about sports teams and I talk about military, whatever, because people can start to experience it at lower levels if they struggle to get it. It's like, get involved in something. Notice how it works. Notice what happens. Notice how you bind together with others. Notice what that is. Get involved in your family. Notice it. But I do believe that scales. And I do think that the highest one holds it all together. So my advice is go to church, but take it at the level that you're ready to take it, right? Get involved in your family if that's all you can do, but do it. You'll see what happens. You'll notice attention, celebration, coming together. Right. And so that's actually what I'm going to talk about now. So it's kind of nice. All right. So I'm going to talk about, we're going to get back to a little bit to the Sam Harris recipe, but not directly. But I'm going to try to use eating as an image of how this kind of all comes together, right? How it all fits together in terms of bringing this pattern into participation. And now this is something that you can do. It's not just interpreting fairy tales or interpreting religious stories, but it is something that you can do in your life. What is eating, right? Eating is gathering something below you into your purpose. That's what eating is. Eating is taking potential, right? And then gathering into your identity, if you want it to say it that way. So the sandwich is broken down and becomes you, quite literally, okay? That's what eating is. So eating can become an image of this whole process of like all of can say how this works, okay? And so when I gather, so when you eat, you already do it. We've talked about it in terms of the recipe. You take different elements in the world, and then you gather them together in a little hierarchy. So you'll have a little hierarchy, which is your recipe, and it has to be a hierarchy, right? Because it's not true that you can mix any type of food together in order to make a recipe. And right, you know that. You don't want to put peanut butter on your steak or whatever. Like there's things that just don't go together in terms of your experience. So recipes have a little hierarchy. Bring that together, right? And then you gather that into yourself. And so you're already participating in this pattern. But there's a way in which that becomes true at a larger level. And so a family meal is also a little image of this whole pattern. So think of a potluck. Potluck's an even better version of this. And so you invite your family, let's say, Thanksgiving, and then people bring their food, bring all the food together, all these little hierarchies. They bring them together, and then they offer this food up, right? Just the way that you take the food and you bring it up into yourself. Now we're doing the same. We're taking this food and we're offering it up. What are we offering it to? We're offering it to our communion. We're offering it to our family. We recognize that this is not just a bunch of strangers walking around in the street, right? This is people that have a reason to be together. Whatever that reason is. It could be family, it could be something else, but it doesn't matter. It's like we have a reason to be together. We recognize each other as being a group, as being something that holds. And so we take the food and we offer it up to that group. It's a kind of little sacrifice, right? And it's a sacrifice to the family. And so you try to make the best food, right? If you go to potluck, you don't want to bring anything. You don't want to be that person that just goes to the store, picks something up. You want to bring something nice, prepared. And if you do that, you're honoring the group. You're honoring the family, right? The person that really makes something amazing and brings it to the potluck. Everybody's like, wow, like that's so awesome that you would be willing to put all that time, all that effort, all that love into this food, which celebrates our group. And then there's like honor is like falls on that person that brings this food. And you think, well, think about it. Is it ridiculous? Like, it's not. But right, if you're just a kind of materialist, all of it sounds ridiculous. And so now you come to the food, and you know, right? And you know that if Aunt so-and-so brings a dish and nobody eats her food, that it means something. Right? It means that Aunt so-and-so is the quirky one that's kind of on the fringe of the family. And so, you make a little effort to eat a little bit of her food, even though you don't really want to, but you do that because you want to make sure, why? It's just food, right? No, you want to make sure that she feels included into the family. And if nobody eats her food, she will feel excluded. There's no way around that. And not only will she feel excluded, she will be excluded to a certain extent. Right? So you gather this food, right? You go to the potluck, you gather it, you put it on your plate, you brought all these little patterns. You bring them into the one plate, you put them on the table, and now the very gathering together around the table will have an order, right? Eating a meal together is not just people sitting around the table and eating, is it? You don't just sit around and eat, just sit down, eat, leave. That would be ridiculous. No. So this sharing of food now becomes a sharing of something else. Right? It becomes a sharing of presence, becomes a sharing of stories, becomes a sharing of looks, right? Where we're looking at each other, we're listening to each other, and it's a dance, right? A family meal is a dance. Whether it's just your family meal, let's say, in terms of sitting together just with your kids and your spouse, or whether it's like a bigger family meal, it has to be a dance. And you know that it's a dance. Well, maybe you don't, but you should know. And if you're not sure that it's a dance, you should try to do the opposite of the dance and just see what happens, right? Eating at a family meal has an order to it. And if you break it, it's not that hard to break it. There are like a million things you could do to break it. Like just sit at the table and then just turn your chair like this to the table. Just see what happens, right? Just stand up on the table, let's say. Like there's a million things you could do to break the dance. But it is a dance, right? So you have to speak to a certain extent. You have to listen, right? You have to not hog the food. You have to make sure, looking at the plates on the table, you're always kind of making sure, did everybody get a little bit of something? Is there enough? Like, oh, if I've already taken a helping of something, maybe I'm going to leave some for the others, right? There's all these things that we do, but it is a ritual. It is a ritualized practice, right? And that can help you understand that all human encounters are like that, right? All human encounters are rituals. That's also something that you cannot avoid. We have a strange modern way of thinking, which we think that somehow informality is reality and that anything formal is fake, right? People have this strange cultural idea, but that's total nonsense. Right? Everything you do in relationship to others is formal, and it has rules, and it's a ritual, right? So the family meal is one thing, but just a conversation is the same, right? If one person only speaks and the other person isn't given a chance to speak, that relationship will break down. And like I said, just try it when you're talking to someone. Just turn your back and see what happens, or just lay on the ground and see what happens. Like there's a million things you can do to manifest the fact that any human encounter is ritualized. There's no way around that, okay? And so then, now when you come at the family meal, now this family meal is heavily ritualized. It's something that you have to learn, something that you have to master. And if you don't master it, you are a danger to the communion of the group, right? At the table, at the family meal, right? If your child is just screaming and doing all this stuff, it's a danger to the communion of the group. And that child has to learn to dance, to participate in the ritual, so that at some point it becomes natural, and then the rules go away, right? It's the same thing like I talked about the piano, right? When you have little kids, it's like, sit at the table, you can't leave without asking permission, like all these different rules that you'll give the child in order to know how to eat at the table. But as adults, we don't follow rules. We just know what it is we're doing. We just engage with it naturally. It becomes very much like dancing, okay? But it is nonetheless ritualized. Now, you can scale this ritual up again. So you have eating alone, which is already all this gathering, sitting at the table with your family, say bigger family gathering. Then you can have a feast. Then you can have a wedding feast. A wedding feast is the best example of that. So why do we eat at weddings? Right? Why would we don't have to eat at a wedding? We could just go to the wedding and then go home. Each of us go to the restaurant on our own. Right? We don't do that. Why don't we do that? It's because we know intuitively that eating together, let me say it this way, even clearer. Eating together is sharing the same body, literally. Like the food we eat the same food, and we're making body with the same food. It's a literal process of let's say, participating in the same body. So we know that gathering together and eating is very, very deeply, deeply, deeply related. Right? We understand that. So now we have the wedding feast. Come together, and then we sit around, we all eat, and then there's the hierarchy at the way it's set up, right? It's like there's the table with the bride and the groom, and then there's a hierarchy of tables, right? You know how that works. Like the people that are closest to the bride and the groom are closer to the head table, and the people that know them less are further from the head table, and we all think this is completely natural. Nobody complains. Everybody kind of knows their position, but if you get it wrong, you might run into trouble. Like if someone thinks they're really close to the couple and they get put out in the table that's kind of behind a post somewhere, they're going to get annoyed, right? They will, because they'll realize that this is revealing something about their relationship that they didn't think was true, right? And so it's tricky. Setting up a wedding feast is very tricky, and it's very contentious. And setting up this ritual, just like a family feast, will expose the cracks in the relationship. They can be a way of mending them, but they can also be a way of exposing the cracks that are already there, right? You know. And so we get together. Then what do we do? What do we do at these feasts? Like, what is this? What are we doing? What is this? What's a toast? But how silly is a toast, right? You take liquid, you lift it up to the sky, and then you honor something. Is that weird? Right? What are we doing? This is a sacrifice. This is the image of a sacrifice, a ritual religious sacrifice. Right? It's not an actual religious sacrifice, so don't freak out and think that you're like sacrificing to some foreign god when you're doing this. But it follows the pattern of a sacrifice. I'm taking food, I'm taking liquid that I'm going to drink, and I raise it up, just like the priest raises up that cup into the heavens. I lift it up, and then I announce something to celebrate. Say, celebrate this. And then everybody does the same. Everybody raises their glass. They're all drinking the same thing or similar things. And then they take a sip together. And they make that real, right, by embodying the same stuff, by making body together, by drinking at the same time. I think of even a toast at a table, right? If we're all close to each other, what do? We all bring it together. Like we all kind of bring our glass together. We even touch each other's glasses. It's like lift it up and manifest our communion through this strange act of food, right? Bringing food up to the heavens. And so now you have everything you need to understand religious sacrifice. You have all the tools you need to understand how that works. Like what are people doing in those days? Like what, they're burning meat to their gods? What is happening? Isn't it strange? Why would you do something like that? It looks very odd, right? But it's not that odd. What the people did, they would take food, take meat, take potential, take the animal part, right? And then they would offer it up to the thing that binds them together, or to the thing that binds them to something, right? So like if I have a purpose, and I want to aim at that purpose, and I want something from that purpose, what will I do? I will take potential, and I will lift it up and offer it to that purpose. right? That's what you do when you play basketball. You take your potential, your energy, your capacity, your body, and you lift it up and you offer it up to the purpose of what you're doing. Now you have this ritualized version of it. So I take the meat, I burn it, it goes up into the sky, right? There's a cloud that makes a pillar that connects heaven and earth, that goes all the way up. Right? And then usually it said that the gods smell it's like it's made spiritual. Now it's not a physical anymore. It's become air. So now it's smelled by the God, and the God sends down their blessing. Right? And a modern person thinks that's the silliest, most superstitious, ridiculous thing ever, but they do it all the time. They just don't realize that they're doing it, but they do it all the time. And the ritualized version of it, it's the pattern, right? It sets up the pattern for the rest of your life. And now, even as a secular person that doesn't believe in any of this, you can understand it because you're saying, this is an important moment, right? It's a sacred moment. I take my time, I prepare myself, I get this animal, I offer it up to the purpose of what I'm doing. And what it does, it sets the pattern for the rest of my life and the rest of my behavior, right? That's what ritual does. Ritual sets the pattern. So take a simple example, you can understand it. If you teach your child to shake someone's hand, what are you doing? I mean, isn't it ridiculous? Okay, touch this person's hand, grab their hand, and then move it up and down like this. So this is what you're taught to do. Like, really, that's how relationships work. It's ridiculous, right? But of course, it's not ridiculous. It's not ridiculous at all, right? You say, this is how you shake someone's hand. Make sure you have a nice grip. Make them know that you're there. Look them in the eye. Don't look away when you're shaking someone's hand. Don't come right up to their face. Don't go like this. Stand straight, put your hand out, shake the person's hand. Learn to shake someone's hand. What does it do? It creates a pattern. It creates a pattern of behavior. You know how far to stand from someone. You know how to engage with them. You know what it means to honor and respect someone. So then that pattern will fall back down into your other behaviors. So when you're teaching someone to shake someone's hand, you're not just teaching them to shake a hand. You're teaching them what's a normal pattern of engagement with a human being. And if you do it every time you meet someone, then that will trickle down into the rest of the way that you engage with them, necessarily. Okay? So if you think about sacrifice that way, even as a secular person, you should kind of understand it. It's like we come together, we offer our attention, our purpose, our food up towards the reason, and then a blessing comes down. A name, a structure, a pattern comes down from heaven. Okay? Now, what happens in the, let's say, in the West or in the Christian tradition is that at some point the problem is that what should you offer your sacrifice to, right? How do you do it? What is the God that you should follow? And so it's like, do I offer it to the God of war, to the God of, this or that, or this or that? And then ultimately, these goods stack up into the highest. And so you offer to the highest God, okay? And then what the people would do at a sacrifice, they would eat the meat. The sacrifice, most of the sacrifices were also a meal at the same time. So you come together, a bunch of people, you offer the food up, and then you sit together and you eat. And you're eating the food that was offered, and therefore, same thing as when you're sitting together as a family, you're making body together in the name of that God, in the name of that reason why you're offering the food. Okay? Does that make sense? Right? Hopefully it makes sense. And it's like, I know I'm stretching people to the limit and trying to get them to explain animal sacrifices, but this is to help you understand how these patterns kind of stack up with each other. And so now in the Christian tradition, you'll have a version of that, which is different, but is still, let's say, very similar. And it's It's a little different. It's a little different because it kind of goes both ways, right? So we come to the church, you make bread, right? And then you offer up the bread, right? Someone had to make the bread. You offer up the bread, and now the bread is blessed, and the wine is blessed, and then it comes back down, and then is given to the people. And then that becomes communion. It becomes the manner in which we bind together because we partake of the same body, we partake of the same food. But in this case, right, it's real. The blessing and the food come together. Like we partake of the same name. We partake of the same. We are Christians. We're little Christs. We all gather into that name. Then that comes down, and it becomes the binding agent for the church. So we come together, we eat the same food, and then we go back into our world, and we remember communion, or remember God is the best way to understand it. So that's the connection between this and that. It's memory, the best way to understand it. So when I talk about how something is positional, that's what I mean. It's like you can be up here or you can be down here. What's important in terms of the reason is memory. Let me show you an image, this image again, word image. Okay, so you've got these monks that are coming up towards the purpose, and on the ladder, you'll notice some of the monks fall from very, very high up, and then some fall from lower down. You could have them fall from anywhere on the ladder, and no matter where you are on the ladder, you can be looking up towards the center, towards the top of the mountain, towards the reason. And so that's actually an interesting way to understand how that works. So let's go back to the communion thing. You go to communion, you get the thing that binds you together, and then you go back out into the world. But if you remember that connection, then whatever you do will be aligned with what it is that you partook of, whatever it is you're doing. But if you forget, then you start to fragment and break apart. So you can go very far away from identity and still remember where you're from or what it is that's binding you, and it's going to be okay. Or you can be very, very far and then suddenly remember, and all of a sudden, if you remember, then that connection happens. There's an interesting image of that in the story of Jonah. So Jonah, God tells Jonah what to do. Says, do this. That's the pattern, right? This is what you have to do. This is the goal. This is the thing you have to follow. It comes from heaven. And Jonah says, no, I don't want to do what you want me to do. God says, go to the city and tell them it's going to be destroyed. Jonah doesn't want to do that. He's like, I don't want to do that. So what he does, he goes in the opposite direction. And he moves out onto the waters. He goes down the mountain, best way to understand it. So God tells him to do something. I don't know, it's not so much on the thing. God tells him to go somewhere and he says no. So he's moving away and he's moving down, 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 down. What's at the bottom of the world? What's at the end of the mountain? It's always water. That's the lowest thing in the world. That's why chaos is often represented as an ocean or something like that, because the lowest part of reality is always water. Salt water, it's even better because you can't drink it. It's death, really. It's like you can't drink it, nothing to do with it. It's chaos at the bottom. So Jonah goes away from that, and he finds himself on the sea with strangers, and then he gets eaten by a monster. This monster grabs him, pulls him all the way down to the bottom of the world. Okay? He's in the fish at the bottom of the world, and then he is, for all intents and purposes, he's dead. Right? He died. He's there for 3 days. And then it says, Jonah remembers the Lord. Jonah remembers God, but he's at the very, very bottom of the world. Right? He's in death. But remembering, right? That's why even the word remember, that's what it means, right? It's like dismember, remember. You break apart, you bring together. Remembering is a regathering. And so Jonah remembers. And as soon as he remembers, he's connected to God. He's very, very far away, but he's still connected to that purpose. And then he repents, obviously. And if you read this prayer, I don't have it with me. If you read his prayer while he's down there, he says, I remember your holy place, right? I remember your temple. I remember that place at the top of the mountain. He remembers the place at the church, he's not the church, but he remembers the top of Mont Saint-Michel. He remembers the place where the glory of God comes down. It's like, I remember your temple. I remember your place. And then because of that, the fish like spits him out, and then he ends up going and doing what God asked him to do. But that's how this thing works. So think about the handshaking, or think about the meal. It's like that. So when you have a family meal together, you are dancing with your family, and you're ritually participating in the union that your family has. You're training, right? You're setting the pattern. So that's why it's like if we talked about participation, we talked about what we can do. That's a really simple, very easy thing we can do, right? Is to just have family meals. It's so hard in the modern world, but that's a great way to start. So you train the model, how to function. It's a microcosm of your whole family. That's where like the problems of your family, they'll appear there. It's better that they appear there. It's actually good. So if there's some little disease in your family, if you sit together and you have this ritual, that's where it's going to start to show. You start to see it there. But then what happens is it's a pattern. So you move, right? You eat together, then everybody goes on their own way. And what you hope is that people remember the communion. They remember the family. And then in their individual acts and their individual things, that they will be connected by memory to the identity of the family. You want that, because if you don't have that, what happens? Your kids leave their stuff lying around, right? Nobody does the dishes. People always expect the other person to do the thing instead of them, right? If you're not connected to the identity, then you start to act on your own, and you don't act as a member of the body. But you don't see the body as being the thing that binds you together. So this idea of like how all of this fits together, you can understand it. It's like it just kind of flows out. And so these rituals of participation can happen at every level. And it's also the same with a marriage. There's a reason why we have rituals around marriage, or the feast around marriage, because you have to remember your marriage. You have to remember the ritual. You come together, you gather all these people. It's one of the, this is like one of the secret reasons why when you get married, you have a bunch of people there, is because it's so that moment when you're tempted, or that moment when you're fighting and it's going to start to break. It's like all those people saw you make that engagement. Like all those people participated. They're like this body that you created, that now all of these people will know that what happened, their memory of what happened there was false, or that there was something wrong about that memory. It's a really good thing. Like inviting people to your wedding is really good if you want your couple to stay together. It's not an arbitrary thing. But even the ritualization of it is important, because it creates a moment. You secular people, like a lot of people, they're just like, you don't need marriage. It's a piece of paper, right? Who needs that? Like, we love each other. That's all that matters. But no, that's not how it works. You have to create these points. You have to create these. You have to create a point where it happens. Like, this is the place. Instead of just space, you have to raise a pillar. You have to make it a marker. Right? That's why we celebrate birthdays. That's why we celebrate things, because we need to mark things. And so a wedding is a great way to do that. So you come together, you stand in front of everybody, and then you make a promise, and then you pledge your allegiance, and you'll engage in some kind of ritual to manifest it. There are all kinds and different traditions. You'll drink from the same cup, you'll light a candle, like whatever, like 2 candles. Like there's all kinds of things that people do. There are different traditions. Like in the Orthodox Church, they'll put crowns, and they'll have the crowns like tied together. So you have these 2 crowns tied together. So you have different traditions. But it's important to do that so that that will act as an anchor. It will act as an anchor for your life. It's not, like I said, it's not arbitrary. In the same way that any of these ritual communions act as anchors. And if you don't have them, then it starts to shatter. Like a good way to say it is that if you never eat together as a family, you'll stop being a family. It's just going to happen, right? If you never meet and eat with your friends, you're going to stop being friends at some point. It's just going to happen on its own. You need to embody and create. You need to create this places, like here, now, this, right now. This is the point of attention, because that's how memory works. Memory, remember, like the world is millions and millions and millions of details. And so memory needs these. Memory needs these in order for it to work. And the punctuated cycle of a day, of a life, this punctuated cycle is to make sure that you don't just wash away in time. Like you could, sadly, some people fall into that. It's like they don't have anything to celebrate. They don't they don't have days that they work and days that they rest. They just kind of go. And everything becomes like this equal. And there's no punctuation. And then they wake up, at 50. They're like, what happened, right? It's like, how did I get here? There's no quality to my life, but quality has, there's a way in which quality happens, and it has to do with creating points, right? So, but I mean, everybody knows that intuitively, right? That's why you organize events with your friends. That's why you go on vacation. That's why you have special meals. All this stuff is something that you do, but I just want you to understand that that's the basis for why you also go to church, why there's religious rituals. And in some ways, the religious rituals are the ones that hold most reality together. And everything kind of stacks into that all the way down to, sitting with your friend and having a drink, right? And engaging in that little ritual. And so hopefully this was helpful to you. Like, I hope that this helps you kind of see how awash, especially now, like awash in the kind of the chaos of the world, and also looking towards these kind of structures of control that we're seeing. We often feel a little hopeless, that it's as if the real world is slipping away from us, right? It's either idiosyncrasy, complete idiosyncrasy and fragmentation, or it's falling into the machine. But if we can grasp this way of seeing, like I hope, grasp that how this fractal structure and how it is in some ways very natural. It's the way a tree grows. It's the way that cells become bodies. Like it's just the way that multiplicity and unity come together, that it can give us a little bit of a track to follow in order to re-engage with meaning and to re-embody meaning in our lives. And it's not that hard. It's hard because it's become almost countercultural, but it's not that hard because that is the way the world works. Right? It's not that hard to live with the cycle of the sun because that's how the world works. It's natural in some ways, but we do sadly have to kind of break our idols, or break a few idols, break a few break a few tyrannies around us in order to be able to re-engage, but it is very much possible. And so I hope that this will give you some energy, some fuel, and some hope that we can do that. So thanks everybody for your time.